All right, so we got some questions that we're going to go over today that came in through viewers, so that's nice to see. We got 4 questions in particular. One, a viewer asked, what were some early difficulties or setbacks that I experienced during beginning Kriya practice and getting involved in it? Another question was, what is the purpose of pain? Which is kind of a fascinating question in and of itself. The third question was, do you think the mind must be clear in order to meditate well? And then the fourth question, it was asking about how I learned Kriya Yoga, who taught me. So we'll start with number 1. So first of all, when it comes to obstacles to Kriya Yoga, everyone's going to be different in that regard, depending on life situation, motivation, ability to understand what is taught. There's a number of factors that can come into play there. When I was first introduced to Kriya Yoga, I'd been meditating not very long, about a year, I believe, before I was introduced to the book Autobiography of a Yogi. And after I read that book, there was no question in my mind that was what I needed to learn. That was something that was very much a part of my life. And so after I read Autobiography of a Yogi, I tried to figure out, well, where do I go? How can I learn this? Because I was in the middle of rural West Virginia, and the only places you could go, which was 9 hours south, or clear across the country, at least that I knew of. So the first obstacle was being in college, getting the money to make the trip and make it all happen. Obstacle number 1. But I was motivated. It happened. It worked out. After that, after I learned the techniques, again, since it resonated so strongly with me, it was something I knew that I had to do, be a part of and interact with and practice. I didn't really perceive too many obstacles. When I learned that you need to get up every morning at 6 a.m. and meditate, well, I made myself get up at 6 a.m. and meditate for an hour. When I read that a vegetarian diet might be possibly more helpful, well, I was again in college, and being in college, doing things college people do. When I turned 21, oddly enough, I decided that's when I was going to give up meat and drinking. So that's interesting. That was probably the biggest problem, to be honest, because of the community I was involved with, family, friends. To give up social things is actually harder than you think, because everyone has this sense of community and ties. And when someone makes a decision that goes counter to what the rest of the community does, that's a big deal. So for example, not eating meat, that was a tremendous difficulty. Not for me. I ate a lot of tofu, ate a lot of salads. I wasn't really an educated vegetarian at that time. I had to figure that out. But going to family events, going to spend time with friends, meat was in everything. It was in every dish. And hearing the things like, well, you can't be healthy not eating meat, you're going to waste away, all these things came up. And so there was a good year, 2 years of just having the difficulty or the frustration of ignoring those people. Of course, I would get in arguments with them because I was young, and I thought that obviously the vegetarian way was best. And so that brought a lot of difficulty. But in time, I mellowed out and realized that, number 1, the diet is my choice. If people don't like it, that's their problem. Number 2, I'm not a strict vegetarian anymore. I do eat meat, but I eat mostly vegetables. So compared to the normal American diet, you could probably say I'm a vegetarian. But compared to a hardcore vegetarian or vegan, I'm not a vegetarian. So it just depends on the perspective. Mainly I just eat chicken and fish, though, when I do eat meat. And that's only once or twice a week, if that. But I don't make a big deal. If there's meat there, I'll eat it. The other thing that was a huge obstacle was changing my schedule. Again, being in college, having friends that like to stay up late and play music or play video games or whatever it might be, go fishing, I don't know. All of a sudden, I decided that I'm going to bed at 9 o'clock because I'm getting up early. That put an extreme, made it a very big problem with the people that I was involved with. So as you can see, the whole process of getting involved from my perspective in Kriya Yoga, changing my diet, changing the way I scheduled my life, that caused a lot of friction with family and friends. But what I found was, as long as I stuck to it, my meditations were better, I was happier, my life was better organized, and those people who were more supportive of just friendship, they eventually adjusted. Those people who were not, they left me alone. I didn't see them anymore. So as you can see, the more that you kind of get involved in a path that is important to you, and you're not doing it to be a fanatic, you're not trying to jam it down anyone's throat or say you need to do this too, but you're just being true to your own path, well, those people that are meant to be there to be supportive, friendships and so on, they'll shake out in the wash. And those that aren't, they'll just disappear and go find someone else that they can spend time with in the way that they like to spend time with, and that's okay. One other particular difficulty that arose was earlier on, I was a fairly fanatical type of person. When it came to being vegetarian, when it came to religion, or when it came to philosophy, I could argue with the best of them. I had to get over that. But during that time period, I started to get the idea that everyone in my life had to think the same way I did, and they had to understand where I'm coming from, and all these sorts of things. And that created a lot of friction within relationships. And I had to learn to let go of that. I had to learn that it's important for me to get up every morning and meditate. It's important to me to study the Yoga Sutras, the Bhagavad Gita, other texts. It's important to me to exercise and eat right so that I can meditate and take naps when I need to. It's not that way for anyone else. And to think that you have to have a relationship or a person in your life that does exactly the same things you do or think the same things you do, well, you're just setting yourself up for heartbreak and suffering there. What I had to learn was, as long as you're in a relationship that is supportive, that you can provide for each other, that you can be there for each other, you can have friendship, but your philosophical and spiritual things, that doesn't matter, because we're all on the same boat, and whatever someone else thinks versus what you think doesn't matter, as long as each of you are on your same path and they don't clash. And what I say by clash, well, it might not have worked for me to be in a relationship with someone who was a devout, intense Christian. Why? Because personally, growing up Catholic, Christianity doesn't really appeal to me, and having someone telling me that I need to get saved all the time or these sorts of things, that's not going to fly. But being in a relationship with someone who takes their spirituality seriously and realizes that it is their own personal commitment to their concept of God, and they can follow that, it's their personal thing, I follow my personal thing, we come together, we have a nice relationship, well, that's what it's all about. Too often people are looking for relationships to be having someone be a mirror image of you philosophically, intellectually, and that's not going to work, hardly ever works. Sometimes it does. It's just not been my experience for myself or other relationships that seem to work well. So those were some big obstacles and setbacks that I experienced. Now, some more practical things, I had to make a list here, so I want to make sure I remembered them all. Some more practical things for me was trying too hard. What do I mean by that? Well, I thought, I need to meditate for extended periods of time. Why? Because in Autobiography of a Yogi and all these texts, they make big deal out of people meditating for 8 hours and these sorts of things. And they don't always exactly explain the fact that, for example, with Yogananda, he started meditating when he was very young, which means he worked up to that in time. And having those extended meditations, usually they don't just come out of nowhere and you can just sit there. You have to prepare the body for them, which is why Hatha Yoga is so important, or in my mind, any kind of physical exercise or routine that keeps the muscles and the tissues strong and healthy. So I would try too hard. And what would happen when I would try too hard? Well, I wouldn't actually be meditating. I would just be sitting there dealing with pain, or I'd be sitting there trying to keep myself awake. And what you find is with meditating, it needs to be a progressive thing. You don't just walk into the gym and pick up 500 pounds if you can't even pick up 100 pounds. You try to do that, you're going to hurt yourself, and you're going to delay your progress through the process. So, starting small and building up. I remember many times trying to force myself to sit for 2 hours straight, and I even brought this up to my teacher at the time, and he just laughed, and he said, just get more sleep. You need to get more rest, which turned out to be true, because once I started to go to bed a little bit earlier and maybe take a nap in the afternoon or after work if I had the capacity to do that, I meditated much better because I wasn't trying to stay awake. My body was more energized. I was also healthier in that regard. So trying too hard was one thing. Also, the balance between sleep and exercise is very important. You need to exercise, whether it's hatha yoga, whether it's weight training, whatever it is for you that allows you to keep your muscles strong, flexible, keep your tissues strong. Because when you meditate, the body needs to be able to sit still comfortably. And if your muscles are weak, or your back is weak, or your neck is weak, well, all it's going to do is bring up pain. All it's going to do is make you uncomfortable. So the stronger you get in your body, the easier it is for you to just turn inward, sit up straight, and stay there for an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, because the body is healthy enough, the structure of the body is healthy enough, the nervous system is healthy enough to maintain that state. And I see this too often with people interested in yoga and meditation, particularly, I just see it too often. There's too much of an emphasis on being relaxed and too much of an emphasis on taking it easy, and not enough emphasis on the fact that you need to be strong and you need to be healthy in your body to make this work. So exercise is key. You don't want to overtrain. That's the other side of the coin. Overtraining, what's that? That's working out too much. Work out every other day. Do some weight training, do some cardiovascular, do some stretching, qigong, whatever it might be. Do it every other day. That gives your body a chance to repair itself, to rebuild. And then on the off days, go for an easy walk or take a nap. All these things help to bring the body and the hormones and the nervous system into balance, so that when you sit down to meditate, you're not dealing with problems in the body. You don't want to have to deal with problems in the body. If you're dealing with problems in the body, you're not really meditating, you're just dealing with problems in the body. So exercise was important. Coming out of college, I didn't exercise at all. I started easy. I started by doing qigong. After a couple years of that, I started doing hatha yoga. After a couple years of that, I got more involved in weight training. After a couple years of that, I kept gradually increasing my capacity for exercise. Now, I'm not an extremist by any means, and I'm not one of those people that go to the gym all the time, but it's important to me. And what I found is the more I exercised while getting plenty of rest, the better my meditation was. Hands down, you have to do that. So that was also an early tripping point. And finally, the last thing that came to mind when I was considering this dealt with the idea of giving up the world, or not necessarily paying attention towards managing our resources in light of becoming enlightened or becoming a spiritual person. And again, that's promoted by all the books that we read about all these wonderful saints who live out in the middle of nowhere, or who have these amazing experiences, that they've given up everything to experience God and the divine. And what we need to remember is that everyone has a different path in life. For example, Lahiri Mahasaya in this tradition, I think he had 5 kids, worked every day, and he was able to experience the state of enlightenment directly. Yogananda was in charge of an organization. There are plenty of other people out there who have been able to interact with the world and still maintain their level of realization or develop it. There are people out there that aren't meant to, whether it's karmic or it's just their path. Ramana Maharshi is an excellent example. He left home, I think, when he was 16, became a renunciate, and then his ashram built up around him. You can see a picture of him with Yogananda in the book Autobiography of a Yogi when Yogananda went back to visit India. So everyone's going to be different. And I had that idea that I needed to give everything up. But what I found was, when I let go of that idea, and when I realized, it's going to be very helpful for me to put attention towards my business and my work so that I can provide for myself, so that I can be someone who is mutually supportive financially in the relationship and my marriage, so that I can afford to do things like have a computer to give talks, or things of that nature. So I can pay my bills and have a vehicle so I can travel and eat good food. Organic food is not cheap. Once that became important to me, it was quite an amazing shift, because it was all of a sudden like these realizations that I'd been chasing for so long just started to fall into place. Now, I was still meditating a lot, but I had my schedule set up in such a way that I meditated for this certain period of time, 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours at a time. It was in my schedule. I have a little book where I keep notes about what I'm going to do tomorrow and the next day. And after that period was done, I would get up and forget about it, forget about any thoughts of spirituality, and just go answer my emails, or do my work, or write, or exercise. So the thing is trying not to separate this idea that when you're meditating, when you're practicing your Kriya techniques, that is the spiritual part, or when you're reading your spiritual books, that is the spiritual part. When you see that everything that you do is just an expression of the divine infinite consciousness, whether it's mowing the grass, or having dinner with your partner, or playing music, or exercising, or sitting at work answering emails, whatever it might be, when you start to see it in that light, that frees up all this energy inside that you need to be doing something spiritual, and then you just realize naturally that everything is spiritual. So it's an interesting thing, but that's one thing I would say that I think a lot of people, especially younger people who are getting involved in this path, they think they have to give everything up, or that there's something unspiritual about being in the world and working in the world. Well, that's a fallacy. We're all here for a reason, to play a part. When we're done, we'll move on to the next place we're supposed to be in consciousness. And maybe that will be hanging out in a mountain, not doing anything. Or maybe that'll be doing something completely different, but you still maintain that state of clarity and awareness no matter what you're doing. And there's a funny thing Yogananda was said to have said when someone asked about yogis who go out into the woods or out into the mountains to give up and renounce everything. He said, well, I've met those yogis, and he said, during the day, they argue about philosophical principles, and at night, they argue about who gets the firewood. So it doesn't matter where you are, you can realize this stuff. And it doesn't matter what someone says they are either. That's an important point that really has been brought home since I've been to Asheville, where a lot of traveling yogis come through, and also studying other people's works, and meeting many different teachers. What I found is that across the board, most of the people that you meet who are teachers are either businessmen or women, or they had an interesting experience and they're capitalizing on it. It's very rare that you'll find someone who really can embody internally what they project out externally. And that's difficult, because we can usually only see the external aspect of things. But the more you meditate, the clearer you get, the easier it is for you to get calm and clear inside, and then tune into someone. So whether that's a teacher that you're interested in, or someone that's coming through town, you can visit and you can tune in. Listen beyond the words. Anyone can say the right thing. It's easy to say the right thing. There's plenty of books and there's plenty of copycats. After Eckhart Tolle came through, well, now there's all kinds of people talking like Eckhart Tolle, which is fascinating. And I've only met one or two that I've sat down and chatted with that you could tell that it was there. It wasn't just lip service, or they weren't just waiting for the next interesting platitude to say or cliche to say. And that's kind of a funny thing. But anyway, the point being, the clearer you get inside, the more you can know that. So ultimately, don't worry about teachers. Worry about learning a technique that works for you. Get your life in order, and then trust in the process. Contemplate, what is it like to connect with my concept of the divine? What is it like to know these things that I need to know spiritually speaking? And then you'll be led. You'll experience the things you need to experience, and you'll have the capacity to know the truth. But it does take practice. And there was one book I was reading recently. A friend of mine got it for me for Christmas, that I wish I had it memorized, the quote, but it was talking about, how do you know when someone else is enlightened? Because as I said, anyone can say the right things, and there's plenty of them out there. But how do you know? Well, it gave this long list of things. I'll have to see if I can find it for you. But it gave this long list of things. But at the end of that list, it said, but this isn't for you to judge someone else. This is for you to know whether you are enlightened. So essentially what it was saying was, don't worry about other people. If you learn something helpful from someone, utilize it. Put it into practice. learn from it. So you start to incorporate all the things that are useful to you on your own path. If you hear something from someone that just doesn't make any sense or is total hogwash, silly word, but don't listen to it. Even spiritual teachers have their own personality quirks. So whether you understand someone's personality or not, that could be a totally different matter based on their internal states. Yeah, okay. So anyway, these were some difficulties that arose when I was getting on the path. Oh yeah, that's what I was trying to think of. So the interesting thing about teachers and enlightenment and who's enlightened and who's not enlightened and why that's a waste of time is because you can only perceive things at your current state. Meaning that if you are enlightened, well, then you will recognize other enlightened beings. But the funny thing is if you're enlightened, you kind of see everyone as though they're enlightened. If you're not enlightened, it doesn't matter who you see, you'll find a reason for them not to be enlightened. Now, I might have said this before in another talk, but that's been something that's been very true, I've noticed. It really depends on your inner state. So keep that in mind. Okay, so the other questions that we had. All right, what's the purpose of pain? Well, that is a very deep philosophical question, but I only have an answer for that. The purpose of pain is the exact same purpose as dirt. We have dirt in the world, we have pain in the world. That's just what's there. If you want to make a purpose for it, that's up to you. But my thought is it's just like anything else. It's like ignorance, it's like dirt, pain, knowledge, good, bad. They're all just things in the world. And again, our goal is not to go through all these things in the sense of wasting all our time trying to figure them out. Our goal is to figure out what we are at the essence of our being, which is one of the reasons why Ramana Maharshi's approach is also very appealing to me, because it cuts through all of the mental linguistics or these questions that we have, like what lessons are we here to learn? Well, we're not here to learn any lessons. We're here as a result of our thoughts, habits, tendencies, those things that we project. If we have confusing consciousness, or if we have things that we want to experience, well, the lesson might be how to experience that. That can be overcoming negative relationships. That could be learning to make more money. That could be dealing with disease. But again, these are all things within consciousness. So as a philosophical question, if you want to contemplate that, go right ahead. But a more important question, as Ramana Maharshi would say, is who's asking that? Once you know what you are, then this idea of pain, it'll still be there physically, relatively speaking, every now and then. But it won't be something that needs to take up your mind and your consciousness. And a lot of pain can be taken care of by changing the way you live, the people you hang out with, the things you do, the way you think. So we have to remember that as well. Question number 3. Do you think that one must clear the mind to benefit from meditation? Well, yeah, to a degree. Our mind is not us. So when you first start to meditate, you can have all these thoughts going on. And it's because our consciousness is not organized or clear that we have all these thoughts. It's like indigestion. If you eat things that don't fit together, or you can't digest well, your stomach keeps talking to you. It takes hours for it to digest. That's what's going on in your mind when you have thoughts. You don't have to have thoughts to exist or to act appropriately. You might have to think about something to accomplish something, but to have that repetitious cycle of thinking, that's not helpful. So when you first start to meditate, you may sit there and you may have all of these thoughts going through your mind. But as long as you are alert and watchful and paying attention, and you're seeing these thoughts, just watching them, breathing, doing your techniques, one time that is giving yourself the chance to digest those things. And in time, you'll experience a thought-free state. Now, the level of thoughts that you have are dependent on your lifestyle, on how much media you take in, on how offended you get by different things, on how important you think you are, because all these thoughts will be generated by that. And the more you meditate, the more you empty out all of this past backlog of undigested experiences, until eventually, a few months, a few years, a decade, you might all of a sudden experience that when you sit to meditate, it's just thought-free. Why? Because you've cleared out all the distractions, you've harmonized your nervous system, your consciousness, your body, all these things. So a clear mind is good to really get into the deeper aspects of meditation, really to be able to contemplate what is true, the essence of reality. If your mind is all going crazy, you can't really focus. So think about it like if you're in a noisy room, it's harder to hear the other person across from you that you're talking to. But once the room is quiet, then you can have an intimate, easy to understand conversation. And it's that way with yourself and the universe. When you can calm down and be quiet, then you can know what you are without thinking about it, and you can be it. It's easier. So yeah, clear mind is definitely a benefit to meditation, but part of the techniques, the purpose of those techniques is to clear the mind. So pranayama, mantra, all these things, if you are doing them and you're clearing the mind, well, that's like taking a mental shower. Now, if you go right back out into the world and start feeling so important, or thinking about the news, or whatever it might be that clogs your mind up with thoughts, or thinking about the past, well, then you're just going back out in the mud again. So what we always have to remember is that once you clear the mind, then we need to also consider, what can I do today that will not add more of this mental garbage? And the more you do that, the quicker meditation, and it's what I would say it's deeper practices, it's a silly word, but it's deeper practices can manifest easier. All right. So final question. Who are your teachers and the source of Kriya Techniques? From my understanding, this was brought to the West through Paramahansa Yogananda and his line of gurus. Yeah, well, I did learn from a student of Paramahansa Yogananda, a student who stayed with him towards the end of his life. And that's been my primary reference for what I share and my own practice. And I studied with him for about 12 years. After that, I met another teacher who was not of the lineage of Lahiri Mahasaya, Sri Yukteswar, Paramahansa Yogananda. That's the typical lineage, yeah. Lahiri Mahasaya, Sri Yukteswar, and Paramahansa Yogananda, with Babaji at the beginning of that. There are other teachers too. There are teachers that have been students of Sri Yukteswar, so instead of Paramahansa Yogananda, it went over to Sri Yukteswar, to another student of Sri Yukteswar's. There are also teachers before Sri Yukteswar, so Lahiri Mahasaya taught people, and then those people had their own lineages. So there's quite a large family tree in this regard. And so I've also met another teacher that's not well known at all, that's from a different lineage, from Lahiri Mahasaya to not going to Sri Yukteswar, but going to one of Lahiri Mahasaya's other students and so on. So I've learned some very important points to refine my techniques through that individual. So this is where it comes from, at least the practices that I do and the things that I'm able to talk about and share. But there are numerous branches and lineages with different ideas about things and different organizations, and I really don't want to get into that because that's a headache in itself. So the main thing to do is whoever you learn from, just learn what you can, apply it in your own life, and don't get caught up in the politics of organizations or who's best or who's doing it right and who's doing it wrong. I mean, that can just go on forever, and it's a big waste of your time. So anyway, that's our first Q&A session. I enjoyed it. Hopefully you did too. If any other questions come up, send them my way. And when I get a chance, probably in a few weeks from now, I'll do another video. So take care and keep meditating.